Good afternoon, alien enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Alien Bulletin. I think I need to make my position clear when it comes to NASA. I mean, after all, I've got a 3D printed gift that was actually given to me by a young fan in Scotland years ago, and somehow, in spite of all of the crazy travel that I've had to take from place to place and rental cars and all of the other circumstances that I've been through, this damn thing has remained intact. It's fantastic, and I'm really grateful to have it. So the reason I feel irritated, of course, with NASA is the fact that they have such narrow-minded views when it comes to potential extraterrestrial visitors or signs of extraterrestrial technology with the various phenomena that we see in the universe around us. They never ever take an open-minded position on these sorts of things. But when it comes to their accomplishments, it's truly astonishing. The things that NASA has done are things that other space agencies and companies have not even come close to accomplishing. SpaceX, for example, has never landed anything on Mars. Indeed, nobody has landed anything on Mars successfully except for China, and that was a pretty recent accomplishment. The Soviets attempted it and failed, and the European Space Agency attempted it and failed, and no other organization has managed to send probes that explored all the way out to the Jovian worlds, to Jupiter and to Saturn, or to the ice giant worlds, Uranus and Neptune, indeed all the way out to Pluto, the New Horizons probe, which uncovered unbelievable truths about this planet that we never suspected. And I continue to call it a planet, by the way. I don't believe in this whole dwarf planet nonsense. Pluto is a planet. It has all of the same characteristics of planets when it comes to moons that happen to orbit it. It also has a very active geological cycle. It's very obvious, something that we never thought was the case. We thought that it was just a dead, icy Kuiper belt sort of object, something that wouldn't be all that interesting at all. And instead, it turned out to be this dynamic world that we have only begun to understand. And once again, this is all because of NASA. Nobody else has come close to accomplishing anything like it. The Soviets managed to land on Venus many times. Yes, they had some amazing accomplishments when it came to that planet, but otherwise, they never came close to matching NASA's accomplishments. And then, of course, there are many other things that NASA does when it comes to human spaceflight. The International Space Station wouldn't exist without NASA. And, of course, landing human beings on the moon. All of these accomplishments, I think, are something that NASA needs to be respected for. But unfortunately, when it comes to their views on extraterrestrial intelligence, they are exceptionally narrow-minded. As narrow-minded as just about everybody else when it comes to these things. As narrow-minded as I'm trying to say as the rest of the mainstream astronomical community and mainstream science. All of that having been said, they are absolutely wrong about 3I Atlas when they continue to describe it as a comet that just behaves like a comet. It has a few curious features, but overall it's just no different than a different brand of coffee or something like that. This is utterly ridiculous. There are so many things about 3I Atlas that we have yet to understand how the hell it's doing it. The most exceptional example, of course, is the million-kilometer lances that it is somehow spewing out directly towards the sun in complete defiance of the solar wind. No other comet has ever been able to do anything remotely like that, and we're having a hard time figuring out how that's even possible. But there are two new discoveries that have cropped up, one of which, by the way, came about as a result of NASA's bizarre, blurry photographs. An interesting observation that Dr. Avi Loeb made, but another one is something regarding the trajectory, something that absolutely shouldn't be happening, and yet it is. So first of all, the first anomaly that we need to talk about is what did we actually see in the high-rise image? I mean, this blurry thing, this fuzzy image, how could we possibly have learned anything useful from that? Well, interestingly enough, blurry and fuzzy as this photo is, it reveals something about 3I Atlas that simply makes no sense at all, at least not if it's an ordinary natural comet. So this was the first visual indication that something was going on with 3I Atlas that didn't exactly make sense. This was an image captured by the Hubble telescope this summer, and at first it just seems like an ordinary looking comet at a considerable distance from the sun until you realize that it doesn't have a tail in the conventional sense. Instead, it had an anti-tail, a tail pointed at the sun rather than away from the sun. But after considerable investigation, after we finally got a look at 3I Atlas from a different perspective, that is to say, from a spacecraft orbiting Mars, we're not entirely certain that this is an anti-tail as we might understand it. Instead, what it appears to be is a tail that is advancing in front of 3I Atlas as it flies through the solar system, not necessarily pointing at the sun, but not following the direction of the solar wind either. And how do we know this? Well, because the high-rise image shows a coma, an extended coma, advancing in the direction of the motion of 3I Atlas. It's not pointed at the sun, but it's not pointing away from the sun either. And this makes no sense whatsoever. An anti-tail might at least have some natural explanation if the sun is warming one side of the comet, and then the comet is ejecting material directly towards the sun as it is being warmed. And then a tail pointing away from the sun is obviously debris and dust and gas that's being blown backward by the solar wind. But something moving sideways, something advancing ahead of the comet or ahead of 3I Atlas, because we've never seen this before with anything else, doesn't make a bit of sense, because this is a side of the object that isn't being warmed by the sun, nor is it a side of the object that's being affected by the solar wind. Instead, it's an anti-tail advancing ahead of the object that has nothing to do with either solar warming or the solar wind. How is this possible? Well, it isn't, at least not if 3I Atlas is a comet. And Dr. Loeb pointed this out a few days ago. Quote, "It is easy to explain a plume of gas and dust extended towards the sun as a result of the illumination of pockets of ice by sunlight, or away from the sun as a result of radiation pressure or the solar wind. It is also possible to explain a trailing stream that the object leaves behind as the drag on the solar wind slows it down relative to the object, but it is much more difficult to account for a plume extended perpendicular to the direction of the sun and ahead of the object. The scale of the extension in the high-rise image is approximately 3,000 kilometers. At the typical thermal speed of volatiles which sublimate from the surface of a natural comet, it takes only a day to cross that distance. Could this be a technological signature of illuminating or clearing the path from any hazardous micrometeorites that might cause damage to a technological object? Well, I have another theory on top of that. I have frequently talked about the possibility of 3I Atlas using nanomachines, perhaps to trigger solar flares, although that's a pretty extreme theory. But another possibility is that nanomachines are advancing ahead of 3I Atlas to gather up material for its use. That would also explain why we have this high nickel residue in the coma. It's because 3I Atlas is gathering up all of the metallic fragments that it can, and there's quite a lot of metal actually out out in the solar system, especially if you're talking about an enormous anti-tail that extends for tens of thousands of kilometers, and then it is cannibalizing this material for use inside the vessel itself, perhaps to replace metallic components or to add additional micrometeoroid shielding. And that would explain the nickel output, because that is the byproduct of the production of nickel-based alloys. In other words, metallic fragments are being drawn in by all of these nanomachines, harvested, if you will, and then cannibalized by 3I Atlas, an in situ resource utilization strategy, not too different to the types of strategies we intend to use as we colonize the solar system in order to perhaps repair the vehicle or to produce duplicates of itself, as a Van Neumann probe would. And for those of you who need a quick refresher on what a Van Neumann probe is, it is a theoretical probe or a theoretical vessel that scouts out an entire galaxy by creating duplicates of itself. Even at relatively slow speeds, if you had a self-replicating probe that started out going to one solar system, then to 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on, it could explore the entire galaxy, every solar system in the Milky Way, in less than 1 million years, which is a very short amount of time compared to the overall age of our galaxy. Once again, just a theory, but we have no idea how this cloud of material is advancing in front of 3I Atlas when it can't be a tail and it can't be a conventional anti-tail either. Now, the second anomaly is something that Dr. Loeb wrote an article about in Medium yesterday, and this one really, in my view, takes the cake. It is one of the most artificial looking features of 3I Atlas when it comes to its trajectory. I've already talked about the weirdness with 3I Atlas in terms of its adherence to the plane of the ecliptic. That is an unlikely thing and very useful for a probe that wanted to intercept 3 different planets on its way through the solar system, which it is. Again, its timing is amazing, coming very close to planets like Mars, Venus, and especially Jupiter. And this is what this next discovery has something to do with, because as unlikely as this trajectory is and as artificial looking as it appears, this last discovery, when it comes to its trajectory, especially its post-NGA maneuver, this tiny little shift that it made as it reached perihelion with the sun, this tiny little adjustment put it directly on course for an amazingly useful location, an astonishingly unlikely event, millions to 1 against that this could have happened by chance, and yet it's happening. Let us suppose, hypothetically, that the interstellar object 3I Atlas is a mothership that was designed to seed Jupiter with technological devices. What would be the largest distance from Jupiter that this interstellar gardener should arrive at? For that purpose, 3I Atlas must arrive within Jupiter's radius of gravitational influence, the so-called Hill radius, inside of which Jupiter's gravity overcomes the gravitational tide from the sun. Interior to that radius, Jupiter's gravity wins over the sun's gravity and can keep low-speed orbiters bound without the sun ripping them away. The Lagrange points L1 and L2, also known as solar system parking lots, where Jupiter's gravity and the sun's gravity cancel one another out, are located at this Hill radius and are ideal locations for technological satellites, since orbital corrections and fuel requirements are minimal there. And as a matter of fact, by interesting coincidence, the Escapade mission that recently launched on Blue Origin's second New Glenn mission is heading towards one of those Lagrange points. The difference is it's a Lagrange point between Earth and the Sun, also known as Lagrange Point 2. Those 2 probes are going to loiter there for about a year until Mars moves into a better position for intercept, and then those 2 spacecraft will move to intercept Mars. These Lagrange points are ideal for these kinds of missions, and interestingly enough, 3I Atlas is expected to get to its closest distance from Jupiter on March 16th, 2026. The Jupiter-Sun separation on that date will be 783.8 million kilometers. If you plug in the necessary numbers to determine what the Hill radius of Jupiter is going to be on March 16th, 2026, it's 53.502 million kilometers. And interestingly enough, 3I Atlas is going to be passing within 53.445 plus or minus 0.06 million kilometers on that day. We are talking about a distance of tens of thousands of kilometers from the Hill radius, a perfect location to distribute probe spacecraft to Jupiter's Lagrange points. What a remarkable coincidence, and it gets spookier than that. The measured value of the non-gravitational acceleration that 3I Atlas acquired while it was at perihelion changed the value of this distance by 0.1 million kilometers. In other words, 100,000 kilometers. This magnitude of displacement in the minimum distance of 3I Atlas from Jupiter results from the measured non-gravitational acceleration value of 5 times 10 to the negative 7th power astronomical units per day, as was previously reported for 3I Atlas. In other words, the non-gravitational acceleration introduced a small course correction of nearly exactly the magnitude needed to bring the minimum distance of 3I Atlas from Jupiter to the value of Jupiter's Hill radius. 3I Atlas would have missed the edge of the Hill sphere otherwise. This suggests that the level of non-gravitational acceleration was finely tuned to bring 3I Atlas exactly to the radius of Jupiter's gravitational influence. If 3I Atlas is technological in origin, and I can't imagine that it isn't at this point, it might have fine-tuned its trajectory with the help of thrusters so as to arrive at Jupiter's Hill radius. In that case, the multiple jets observed around 3I Atlas in its post-perihelion images might have been used for that slight orbital correction in order to reach this point. The optimal time for any such maneuver is close to perihelion, when a spacecraft can take advantage of the gravitational assist from the Sun. In addition, 3I Atlas arrived at perihelion while being hidden behind the Sun for Earth-based observatories. We therefore do not know whether it just maneuvered slightly to satisfy this difference, or also released technological devices near perihelion that might be heading directly towards us at this very moment. How statistically rare is the coincidence between the values of this Hill radius and the overall trajectory of an object passing randomly through the solar system? A margin of 0.06 out of 53.5 million kilometers corresponds to a coincidence of 1 part in 1,000. But given the full diameter of Jupiter's orbit around the Sun, this coincidence amounts to 1 part in 26,000. If 3I Atlas were to deposit devices within the Hill sphere of Jupiter on March 16, 2026, these devices would need to fire their engines in order to cancel out the high speed of 3I Atlas relative to Jupiter, which will be about 65.9 kilometers per second. Now, I think we can safely assume that if this is an artificial object, whatever technology is required to shift an object that weighs billions of tons, even a few kilometers off its course, if they have the power to do that, they have the power to deploy a smaller spacecraft and reduce its speed by 30, 40, 50, 60 kilometers per second, whatever is necessary. Now, of course, Avi Loeb has brought up the possibility that this means that 3I Atlas was never all that interested in us at all, and this could be a terrible blow to our egos. And although I think that might be true, there is another possibility. Years ago, I read a proposal talking about putting a base in the Trojan asteroids. The Trojan asteroids are two grouping of asteroids at Lagrange point 4 and Lagrange point 5, where Jupiter and the sun's gravity cancel one another out. And why would you do that? Well, it's to protect Earth from incoming asteroids and comets. In this location, an optical telescope could, number one, detect comets when they were much further away than an earthbound telescope could spot them, and number two, could also spot near-Earth objects that would ordinarily be lost in the solar glare, at least from our perspective. And on top of that, this base could be equipped with missiles capable of deflecting the trajectory of dangerous asteroids when these are so far away from the sun that their sun-centric speed is very low. This is the perfect opportunity to deflect these objects off their course. Is it possible then that 3I Atlas is deploying something to defend us? Might 3I Atlas know something about an incoming threat that we do not? And if 3I Atlas is indeed deploying some sort of asteroid deflection station that could preserve us from a civilization-ending cometary impact in the future, what does that mean about the civilization that created 3I Atlas and sent it on its course here? Does that mean that they mean us no harm? That they want to preserve our civilization for some reason? And if so, why? So, once again, bizarre. Just very bizarre and something I wish that NASA would address. I mean, at this point, we're really kind of up to 14 anomalies, talking about this strange extended halo, anti-tail, whatever you want to call it, that's actually advancing ahead of the object, regardless of whether it's heading at the sun or not. It just seems to be an anti-tail that's moving ahead of the object to clear things away from it, or to probe ahead of it, or perhaps to exploit the various materials in the solar system that might be ahead of it. Who knows? Again, we've talked about this in the video already, but it isn't something that typical comets do. And then on top of that, we have this incredibly unlikely event, this trajectory that is going to take it to an incredibly useful location where, as we've already talked about, it could drop off probes, it could drop off a space station of some kind. It would be so incredibly useful to place a probe at this location to where it could start maneuvering towards Jupiter, or simply stay put there and maintain its position in sort of a monitoring location where it's not going to drift very much. Any locations where you're not going to be pulled out of it by gravity, or you don't need a whole lot of adjustments to be made in order to hold your position or in order to change your trajectory. All of these things are precisely what we do every time we are deploying something into interplanetary space, that we want to remain there, or we want to carry out various objectives. For example, the Escapade mission that was recently launched by Blue Origin. These two probes are on their way to a solar Lagrange point 2, where the Earth and the sun's gravity cancel one another out. They're going to loiter in this location. It won't require a whole lot of propellant to keep them there because there's no gravity affecting them until Mars moves into an ideal position. What if that's what 3I Atlas has in mind? What if it's dumping off probes or a station of some kind, a monitoring station or something that serves some other purpose in this location where it will loiter until something happens, until it needs to change course? We will see how things develop as time goes on. Of course, the best way to do this is to continue to watch this object very closely as it heads out of the solar system. Every little thing it does, I think, is significant and something that NASA should really keep their eyes peeled for. We'll see if they actually do, but even if they don't, there are certainly lots of amateurs who are watching this object as well, along with a number of observatories who have no connection to NASA, who are providing very useful useful imagery, very useful data. So we will continue to watch that as well. Thanks very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. You can get access to early release content and also some exclusive stuff and our Discord server, or feel free to pick up a piece of merchandise if you're interested in that. All the details in the description. And until next time, stay angry about space.